We're going to dive into the passage this morning, and we're going to not start right at the beginning. We're going to start in the middle as Solomon begins to describe different parts of what make up each of our lives. And he does that by giving examples, and so we're going to dive into verse 2 here. I'm going to look this way. One of these days I'll figure that out. But he begins in verse 2, and he says that there is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So he gives us a lot of different examples, and you put all of those together, and you have the moments that make up our lives. And he does this by placing two words together that are polar opposites. This is a literary way of thinking, and again, he's into poetry. He's into writing poetry, and so he is using a literary device that we don't often learn in school these days. We learn about symbolism and metaphors and haikus and hyperboles and these types of things. This is called a merism. Anybody ever heard of a merism? A merism. A merism is when a figure of speech in which two words are paired together that are polar opposites. They're paired together to make up a whole thought, okay? So we're not going to have time to go through every single one of these. There's like 15 different pairs here, and if I did that, we would be here well past lunchtime, and everybody would be mad at me. They would be thinking now is a time for war, right? So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pick a few of these and bring them out. So we'll start at the beginning. There's a time to be born, and there is a time to die. Again, these are two polar opposites that make up a whole. They're meant to describe the beginning of life and the end of life, and as they make up a whole, they're then meant to describe everything in between. So from birth to death, and all of life in between. That's part of the days of our lives, of what make up what we do and who we are. So we start out as a baby, right? We start out as a baby. And babies are completely dependent upon whoever's taking care of them, right? They are completely dependent. And quite frankly, oftentimes they don't really seem all that thrilled about being completely dependent. They are crying and crying in their crib because I'm hungry and I can't feed myself and you aren't listening to me, or I am done taking a nap and why aren't you picking me up? I don't care if it's 3 a.m. You need to pick me up. And so babies are completely dependent, but oftentimes not all that happy about that fact. But babies eventually do grow up and they become children. And children are mostly dependent. But children often dream of being completely independent. Many children dream, they look at maybe older siblings or other kids that are older in school and, I can't wait to be a teenager and be able to stay up later and finally be able to drive a car and all of these different things. And so children are often dreaming of, I hate being this little, and I hate being told what to do all the time. I mean, at the drop of a hat, mom or dad could say, go wash the dishes, and you got to go wash the dishes. And how outrageous is that? And so they dream of one day finally achieving independence. Now, teenagers are less dependent, but still a little dependent. But they dream of being completely independent. And quite frankly, many teenagers feel like they should be independent right then and there. They should be able to take the car whenever they want it. They should be able to stay up as late as they want and do the things that they want and go where they want. And they dream of that day when they can finally graduate and not have to go to school, not be forced to do the various things that they're forced to do. And so they're always thinking ahead to that next phase. And eventually you become a young adult, right? Some of you are young adults. You are mostly independent. Mostly independent. Young adults are a mixed bag. Some young adults dream of the day when they can be completely independent, living on their own in their own apartment or own house, doing their own thing and having their own car and being completely independent from mom or dad. Other young adults are saying, I don't like this adult thing. I want to be a kid again. Why do I have to grow up? And most young adults have moments when they feel both, right? And then you have your regular old adult. Adults are independent, but oftentimes they now have dependents. They have kids, and those kids really focus in their time so that even though they are independent, really those adults are not independent. They are dependent upon what their kids can do and can't do at any given moment. And they dream oftentimes of when their kids can be just a little bit older and they don't have to spend money on a babysitter, or they can just go out. They can just wave and say, hey, we're going out. You're on your own. Find something in the fridge. And then you have seasoned adults. Seasoned adults. And they are independent. But they're dreaming and wishing for the days when their kids were younger. Where did the time go? They've gotten so old, and they don't call anymore. And then you have the elderly. Now, the elderly are at various stages, depending on age and physicality. But at some point, the elderly get to the point where they become mostly dependent again on their kids or others. I will never forget the day when my mom and dad were arguing and arguing. My grandparents had reached the stage, my mom's parents reached the stage when it was just unsafe for them to be driving. I'd gone on a ride with them, and I was in the back seat, and I was scared to death because my grandfather couldn't see out of one eye, could barely see out of the other, and my grandmother would sit next to him, and my grandmother would straddle. Her foot would be over here, and she would operate the gas pedal, and my grandfather would operate the brake because he only had one good foot. And they were going over curbs as they turned, and I was in the back seat. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And finally, my parents had had enough, and it's time to take away the keys. And so they went in, and they took away the keys. And my grandfather was furious. Furious. And I remember, I was like, I can't remember how old. I think I was a teenager. And I remember looking at my mom and dad, specifically my mom, and I said, Mom, remember this day. Remember this day. Remember how they're acting, please. Well, a couple months ago, my parents, they wanted to drive down well past Columbus, closer to Cincinnati, where my one brother lives, and they shouldn't be driving that far. They just they're just at that point. They can't drive for hours like that. And I was talking to my dad and said, Dad, you really shouldn't do that. And he blew up on me. Don't you tell me where I can go and how I can go. I'm your father. And I thought, here we go. Here we go. We live in that space of seasons in our lives from birth to death. And the funny thing is, whatever season, whatever phase of life we tend to be in, oftentimes we're wishing we were in a different phase. Because we tend to accentuate the pluses of a different phase and minimize the pluses in the phase that we're in. And not really think about the negatives of the phase that we want to be in, and we accentuate and magnify the negatives of the phase that we're in. And I think we do that because our heart at any given moment in any given phase of life says, there has to be something more than this. Something better than this, because I'm just not satisfied. Maybe the next phase of life will be better. Well, Solomon tells us in the midst of all of these different things, he says there's also a time to break down and build up. Break down and build up. Now, these are construction words. Construction words. And we know that Solomon knew a lot about construction. He built lots of houses. He even built the temple. And he's using these construction words to describe seasons of life. Sometimes in life we're in a season of building. That's a nice season, building. Everything is moving along. Everything in life at that moment is going right. We are learning, we are succeeding, we are growing. This is a phase of life we like to be in. But Solomon says that there are also seasons in our life when it's a time to break down. Break down. Sometimes, in order to move forward, in order to grow, you first have to tear down what was there and start over, start fresh. And that's true of our own individual lives. It's true of families. It's even true of churches. Sometimes you have to tear down before you can build up. It's the way things work. He says that there is a time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. Now, this particular merism is meant to cover the full spectrum of emotions that go on in our lives. That there are seasons where some emotions are more prevalent than others. Sometimes the path forward to healing in our lives is by weeping, by crying, by mourning. You know, this belief that's put forward in our culture that real men don't cry, that's a nasty lie. It's a nasty lie. And the belief that Christians should never be sad because, hey, we have eternal life. We have Jesus. We should never be sad. That is just plain unbiblical. It's not biblical. Folks, you have my permission this morning. Well, better yet, you have God's permission this morning, I believe from his word, to sometimes think or say, sometimes life just stinks. It's true. Sometimes life just stinks. Sometimes life is just unfair. Sometimes life just feels too overwhelming. That's real. That's true. And sometimes it's okay to just cry it out because there are seasons in our life when it's okay to weep. It's okay to mourn. It's okay. Because here's the reality. We're not in heaven yet, folks. We're not there yet. In heaven, there will be no tears. We know that from the book of Revelation. There will be no crying, no tears in heaven. But we're not there yet. We're down here under the sun. And so sometimes the best path to healing is through tears. But graciously, there are other seasons in life when he gives us that we can laugh. That we can laugh and dance. Maybe not literally dance. I mean, you can literally dance if you want to. But it's that feeling of utter joy. Those moments when that life gives you that everything's going well and you're just laughing. So some of my favorite memories as a family are just sitting around the dinner table and everyone's talking and we just start laughing because something funny comes up and everyone is just laughing. Those are some of my favorite memories from when I was little, sitting around the dinner table, and there's some of my favorite memories in my own family here with my kids and Sandy. There are seasons, whether those seasons last for a day or for a week or a month or a year, where we just get to laugh. And that's okay. He says that there's also a time to embrace or refrain from embracing. This merism is meant to cover the spectrum of relationships in our life. That we have various relationships in life that come and that go. And sometimes in life, it's a season of embracing, whether that be physically or emotionally, that we get to go deeper into a relationship, that we get to know someone better and go deeper in our time with them, that we get to build a friendship or maybe find that person that we're going to marry. Sometimes we are in a season of embracing, but there are other seasons in life in which we need to refrain from embracing, Solomon tells us. When we are betrayed, when we're abandoned, or when a relationship just isn't healthy, it's time to cease from embracing. He tells us that there's a time for silence and a time to speak. Speaking of relationships, how much better would each of our marriages be if we understood this principle? That sometimes there's a time for silence. Sometimes Sandy and I are in an argument, and I can feel the Spirit of God saying, just shut up, Andy. Don't say what you're thinking, what you're about to say. Just be silent. And sometimes I heed the voice and I'm silent and it goes well. And sometimes I'm ornery and I'm going to say it anyway, and I just let it rip out and it doesn't go well. Sometimes in life, we're in a season of silence. Just be quiet. And sometimes it's time to speak. It's time to talk it out. It's time to communicate and communicate well. And sometimes, this is the final one we'll do, sometimes it's time to love. And sometimes it's okay to hate. You see, we're called to hate sin. We're called to hate sin. We live under the sun in a sin-scarred, filled world. And we should hate the sin around us. We should hate the deeds of darkness. and the wounds that fester in us and in those around us, and the terrors and the miseries in this world. What's going on from the hurricane that just passed? What's going on in North Carolina and Virginia and in South Carolina and Florida? We should hate that. People are in misery right now. They're hurting. They're dying. That's the result of being under the sun. And it's okay to hate those moments, hate those times, and hate what is going on in our world. But we're also called to love people. We're called to love people, to forgive, and to show mercy, and to show kindness and patience. And here's the thing. There are too many Christians lately, too many Christians that have utterly confused when it is time to hate and when it is time to love. Too many Christians that are bending their morals, bending their beliefs. Oh, it's okay to do this, and they're not hating the deeds of darkness. And too many Christians who are looking at unchristians and hating them because of their views or the way they talk or various other things. We've confused those times. And Solomon is saying, look, you have to know what time it is. You have to know what season you're in. You have to know the right things to love and the right things to hate. And all of these times, all of these seasons make up our lives. And it may seem like they come at random, that, you're just in whatever season you're in, or maybe you can make yourself be in the season. But that isn't the case. Solomon wants us to understand that isn't the case. And he tells us this with these two bookends, what he says before all of these pairs and what he immediately says after. So let's go to the beginning of the passage, 3:1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. So Solomon is saying that our lives are made up of seasons. Seasons. He uses that word deliberately because he is speaking into his culture, his society, and they were primarily an agricultural society. So they would get this idea of seasons and how he's trying to relate that to life. You see, farmers understand that each part of the season is different and requires them to consciously and strategically approach each season differently. In one season in the year, it's time to plant, right? And that means they have to go out at certain times and they have to do certain things in order to plant the fields. They need to feed the soil. They need to lay the seed. And then they're in a season where they have to patiently wait for the seed to grow, even as they continue to water. And then finally, there is a season of cultivating the crops, where the crops have come out and they now go out and they have to get them and pick them up. And so there are different seasons for different tasks and different things in life. And here's the thing, if the farmer decides to skip seasons, I really don't enjoy planting. So I'm going to skip that season. And then they go and they're waiting for crops to come up. They're going to be waiting a long time, right? There's nothing coming up because they skipped the season that they didn't like. And some of us, we like certain seasons. That build season sounds really good. I like that season. But tearing down, that doesn't sound so good. I'm going to skip that season, and I want to go right to the build season. But the build season isn't going to come unless you first go through the tear down season. making this sanctuary look nice had to start with a whole lot of work. And, and yesterday, as we tore out the carpet, whoa. Yeah, there were three of us when we started, and we started pulling up. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. We'll just rip it up, and boom, we'll be done in no time. Didn't realize it was glued down. And it was like putting every bit of muscle in it, and you would get just about that far. This is going to take forever. I don't want to do this. But you can't enjoy the season of new, fresh carpet unless you first walk through the season of the work of tearing out the old. And folks, too many of us are trying to skip seasons in our life, thinking, well, this is the season I want to get to, so I'm just going to get to it. But you can't get to this season without traveling through this harder one first, and traveling through it well. And Solomon wants us to understand that there's a way things work. These seasons don't happen randomly. They generally don't obey our desires when we try to force a particular season into our life. It usually ends in disaster. But here's the hope in the passage. Solomon says that there is a time, that there is a season for every matter under heaven. Now, I want you to notice the colossal shift that Solomon is making. Up until now, his favorite phrase has been life under the sun. That's his code phrase, under the sun. And when he says under the sun, he means down here on earth in this sin-filled world as we try to navigate it, largely without God. But now he switches in chapter 3 to talking about life under heaven. What he's doing when he says that is he is now saying it's still talking about life, but we're going to reinsert God into the picture. God is the one who is sovereign. God is the one who is planning and moving in our lives. And we can't look at the seasons of our life correctly if we don't look at how God is sovereignly positioning us to move through certain seasons at certain times in our life. We have to put God into the picture. And so finally he inserts God into the discussion of our lives, into our seasons. Now, a psalmist in Psalm 104 captures this essence of God's sovereignty in seasons. Psalm 104, he says, "He made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows its time for setting. You make darkness and its night when all the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. And when the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until the evening." So the psalmist is recognizing that the whole earth, the earth itself, the sun, the moon, as well as the seasons, as well as the things on the earth, the animals, and man, all operate under routines, under seasons. We do certain things at certain times, and it's all under God's sovereignty, how he made it, how he wants it to be. And here's the thing. We have to learn to trust that the season he has us in is the right season. Do you truly trust Jesus? Told you I was getting to that question. Do you truly trust Jesus? Not just for eternity someday, but with your time and your seasons here in this earth. Do you trust that whatever season he has you in is for a good reason? He exemplifies this point by the bookmark. I said that this passage is bookmarked by the first verse we just covered, as well as verse 11 in chapter 3. This is what verse 11 says. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Not only is God sovereign over our seasons in life, but he sovereignly makes every season beautiful because he loves us. That word beautiful has two meanings. It means A, beautiful or pleasing, but the second meaning of that word beautiful is healthy and well. And so we may not like every season we find ourselves in. I certainly don't enjoy seasons of mourning or seasons of crying. I don't think anyone does. But we can trust that if God has us in a particular season in life, it is for our good. It is to make us healthy and well as we move through life. He has a good reason for allowing us into a particular season in life. And that reason is to help us to grow and to grow closer to him and to become more like him. Now that fact, this idea of we're in seasons in life, all of these things happen to us in our life, but you got to insert God into the picture, that he's sovereign over these seasons. I want to end with a few points to make about these seasons. Number one, you need to ask God for wisdom to discern what season you're in, because we don't always see it. Because we want to be in certain seasons so badly in life, we can imagine or pretend that we're actually in that season. Oh, I really want to build, so I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to build, and I'm going to invest in these things, and I'm going to take on a new job, and I'm going to do all these other things. And meanwhile, God has you in a season of tearing down. And if we operate ourselves in a season that we're not in, it's going to end in disaster. You need to ask God for wisdom to understand what season he has you in. Lord, is this a time for me to stay silent? Or is this a time for me to speak? Again, how many marriages would be more healthy if we just prayed that question before we spoke? Lord, is this a time for us to break down? Or is this a time for us to build? Lord, is this a person and a time for me to embrace? Or is this a person or time for me to refrain from embracing? Do you see how this works? We need to bring God into the picture because he is sovereign over our lives and over the seasons in our lives. And so we need to ask him, what season am I in? What season are you pointing me towards, Lord? Number two, stop spending your time wishing that you were in a different season. I know it's tempting, but just stop it. Stop being like the kid that just spends all his time wishing that he was a teenager and just loses out on being a kid. Or a teenager that wishes they were a young adult and misses the opportunity to do things that only a teenager can do. So on and so forth. Live in the season that you're in. Because here's the thing, he says in this passage that a season is only beautiful in its time. That's an important phrase. He has made everything beautiful in its time. In other words, if we try to force our way into a season that God doesn't sovereignly want for us in that moment, is not prepared for us to move into, it will not be beautiful. It will not be pleasing. It will not be healthy for you and me in that season. But if we wait and we ask for wisdom, what season am I in? Okay, I'm in this season. I'm going to live in this season. He promises, I will make it beautiful. I will make it pleasing. I will make it healthy for you to walk through this season in its time. And number 3, start asking God for what he wants to do with you and in you and through you while you're in a particular season. Don't just sit there and say, okay, I'm in this season. I hate being in this season. I'll just sit here and wait until I'm in a different season. You're going to sit and wait a long time until God does what he wants to do in you and through you and with you in that season, he's not letting you out of that season. So far better to just say, okay, God, I'm in this season in life. I'm going to stop thinking about these other seasons. I'm going to focus in on this season. What is it that you want to do? What good thing do you want to do? And good does not mean feel good. Just means that it is good for us. What do you want to do in me and with me and through me in this season? And then do it. God knows what the best season is for you today. And if you let him, if you trust him, he will make it beautiful in its time. And he will carry you through to the next season in your life. So a couple of things for us to consider. I just really have a couple questions up here. What season of life are you in right now? What season? We're all in different seasons. What season are you in? If you don't know, time to ask for wisdom. And are you fighting it? Or are you seeking wisdom for how God wants to use this season in your life? Don't fight it. Surrender and yield to Jesus, and he will make it beautiful. Would you pray with me? Lord, thank you that you are sovereign over all. Lord, forgive us for fighting with you, for thinking that we know best what season we should be in, for those times where we say, I don't want to be in this season, I want to be in this season, and we try to force things, and then we mess everything up, and we're miserable, and we blame you. Lord, forgive us for those moments. Help us, Lord, to ask for wisdom. Help us, Lord, to wait and be patient and to live in the season that you have us in. And help us, Lord, to do the things in this season that you want us to do and be. Trust you with that. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.